Let's play a game. Let's create the ideal Mortal Kombat game by only using features from the mainline Mortal Kombat titles that have already been released and Frankensteining them together, but there's a catch. I can only copy one feature from each game, which will become problematic. The feature can be any one thing, whether it's a gameplay feature, mechanic, visual thing, art style, general design philosophy, music, sound, story, lore, fan art, whatever. Starting off with MK1. Which MK1? From 1992. The one that started it all. Now, this is a pretty good game. It's got a nice aesthetic, some good looking characters, the combat is satisfying, for the time anyway, but I think the one thing I'd port over from it is this concept of non-lethal finishers. The gameplay's okay, but subsequent titles vastly improved on it. The story and lore did set the stage for the entire saga, but they were pretty bare bones back then. The lore hadn't yet evolved into what we know today. Well, I guess we don't know it today either, because they keep changing it. The music was cool, but again, it got better in the later games. Yet this concept of non-lethal finishers is pretty intriguing and unique. It hasn't been replicated since. Many people have made the argument that fatalities should be tailored to the personalities of the fighters, in which case, some should be brutal, some torturous, some straight and to the point, and some even non-lethal. And even if you disagree and think, yo, it's just a game, bro, let me have my lols. As I've mentioned before, games in general, and fighting games in particular, are all about player/character expression, so you should take advantage of any avenue to provide options for expression, and non-lethal finishers would be one such option. One of many I drone on about here just for lols. Anyway, moving on to MK2. I don't really know what to pick from MK2. I mean, it added a bunch of new features, sure, it added new stages, a new setting, it introduced Shao Kahn, but there's not that much that I would copy over, to be honest. Maybe the lore. It established a big chunk of the lore and characters that we know today. I think I'm gonna say fatalities, or just the general philosophy behind them. I was gonna pick that for MK3, but it's really the same ones in MK2, it's just more of them in 3, and there's more characters, so the overall design philosophy around fatalities is pretty much the same, and I much prefer that. It's fast, it's to the point, it's funny. That's really what I think fatalities for the most part should be. They should be either really fast, really witty, really stylish, and they shouldn't take up too much of your time. It's just a nice little cherry on top. Like, one of my fondest memories back in the day is of playing Mortal Kombat Trilogy and beating the game and tapping Ultimate Fatality Demonstration for the first time. Dude, I got apoplectic. That's how hard I laughed. This is one of my happiest experiences. Tears were streaking down my face. Doesn't sound like much, but it's really one of my happiest memories. So I'm not gonna forget that. Fatality design philosophy of this game, that's what I pick all the way. It's kind of the point. Yeah, gore, yeah, you know, shocking people and all that, but really the main part of it is the dark humor. Main part of it is just like an R-rated Looney Tunes, to be honest. So let's go for that. On to MK3. Now, this game introduced a lot of the features that ended up being part of the core personality of Mortal Kombat as a whole. It introduced running, it introduced dial-up combos where everyone had their specific combo strings that you could, you know, just dial up. It introduced pop-ups, juggles. It also introduced things like stage transitions, which was pretty cool. And these got ported into 4, they got ported into MKX. They're some of the most iconic features in all the games, and I would argue that these things are so iconic that they're part of the core identity of Mortal Kombat. You may move away from them, you may try different things as NRS tries to do, but you will always come back to this style of Mortal Kombat. So from MK3, I would definitely pick the base iconic gameplay, which basically sums up all of these. I would have picked that for X, but honestly, when you really think about it, X is just a more elaborate version of this. It's still based on all of these things, on the running, it's based on juggles, it's based on dial-up strings. There's just more of them and more that you can mix and match. So the core gameplay experience is a spiritual successor to this, so I'm just gonna pick that here. MK4, this is the odd one out. This is the one that people like to shit on for a variety of reasons, some of them warranted, but I also think it's pretty underappreciated because MK4 understood something important, something that some of the newer games forgot almost entirely, and that something is fun. MK4 is so goddamn fun. I don't care that the combos are all the same. I don't care that it looks a little bit janky. I don't care that it's their first foray into 3D and it just kind of looks like pixelated vomit because of it. I don't care that Reptile looks like tree moss. MK4 is just so much fucking fun to play. And the fact that the other thing that it understands intimately is how to be funny, honestly just works in its favor. This is one of the most fun MK games and by far the most funny MK game ever made. It is just hilarious. And part of what makes that work, if we really try to amalgamate all of these into one feature so that I don't have to cheat and pick multiple ones, part of what makes it work is the fluidity of it, the general fluidity of it, the way the characters move, the acceleration, deceleration. They're so cartoony in a good way, whereas a lot of the newer games, even the 3D era ones, they're so clunky and slow by comparison. Now, of course, MK4 takes it a little bit to the extreme, where the fighters behave like a bunch of hamsters on cocaine, but I think as a general principle, the overall fluidity and movement of this game is something that I would have my entire team of hypothetical game devs study and port over just as a general philosophy into whatever game I'm making. Now, there's a lot of things I love about this game, as I mentioned before, the humor, which tends to go underappreciated, the sidestepping, which would make the game technically 3D, yes. And I kind of want all of that. It's all part of this whole fluidity thing, but if I had to pick one thing, I don't really care that much about sidestepping or anything else. It's got to be this general philosophy of movement. Quirkiness. Let's go with that. Fluidity or quirkiness. Deadly Alliance. Technically, DA introduced Conquest mode, but it's got nothing to do with the Conquest mode that we know and love from Deception, so I'm not gonna pick that. Deadly Alliance is a weird one. It was their first foray into proper 3D. Yes, the characters had a very cool look to them. Yes, everything was darker and larger than life. Yes, it was a new era of MK, but being the first game in the 3D era, it looked not as good as Deception. There's no other way I can put it. Deception's much more polished, and by the time we get to Armageddon, it's kind of worn out its welcome. They didn't really add anything meaningful to it. So Deadly Alliance is a good first step, don't get me wrong. Some of the designs are peak. This is one of the best Sub-Zeros out there, but it's not the most polished experience. I guess what I'll pick is the character models specifically. Deception refined them, but really all three 3D games share the same overall look. This is not the art style per se, by the way. I'm not picking the art style. This is part of the overall aesthetic, but I'm just talking about the character models specifically, the proportions, the anatomy, the bulkier look, which I think suits Mortal Kombat so darn well. It's fucking premium shit. Mortal Kombat is like the manliest, edgiest fighting game out there. It's full of death and murder and blood and guts and horror and deception and brutality. It should look like something straight out of Baki. Baki mixed with some JoJo's, sprinkled with some sleeker, more elegant bits from like kung fu movies and shit. So we're not picking general art style, we're just picking the character models, which are so goddamn appetizing. Look at that, I could just like grab that. Deception. This game is impossible to pick from. It's just no. I'm not even gonna try. I'm probably gonna cheat here. You know what? Let's try to not break my own game. Let's actually analyze the situation here. I mean, it's just got so many things going for it. You got the art style, the 3D arena, the death traps, the fighting styles, the conquest mode, the added lore, the story, the mini games, harakiris. This is just a smorgasbord of things to pick from. I think let's go through them one by one. Art style, that we're gonna cross that off right off the bat. As I said with Deadly Alliance, I'm not gonna pick that from any of the 3D era games because it's basically the same art style. I'm gonna save that for a different game, even though this is like a very close second for me. The 3D arenas, yeah, 3D is fun, but I'm not hung up on it. I don't really care. Whether the game is 2D or 3D, you can make a great fighting game in either of these categories. And in many ways, as much as people like the 3D games, in many ways the third dimension is a little bit overrated. You can do some fun stuff. It adds another, for lack of a better term, dimension to gameplay, but it's not mandatory. The death traps I really love. I fucking love death traps, and I'm kind of salty that we haven't seen them since, ever. What the fuck, that's the most MK thing ever. And if you do pick death traps, then you kind of have to pick 3D too, because it's kind of, having death traps in either corner of a 2D stage, it just doesn't work. It's too simplistic and frustrating. But in 3D, you need that third dimension to make it interesting, to have to set it up, to wind up there accidentally in that one point in space where you can then push the enemy player into a murderous pool of piranhas. So those are a key contender. The fighting styles, they're cool, but for the wrong reasons. Everyone likes them for the wrong reasons. If you think about it, you can take all the moves from all the fighting styles and just list them off as one big style. You don't need to have a style switch button. Sure, there are some moves that probably contradict others, but there's plenty of ways that you could program it so that they don't conflict. So fighting styles, I love them, but they have always been more or less just flavor text. You can definitely improve them, and that might be its own video. I'm going to think about that, but for the purposes of this one, I'm definitely not picking that. The added lore and world building is awesome. It's the reason why Deception is one of my favorite Mortal Kombat games of all time. I love the idea of the Dragon King. It's a much needed breath of fresh air. breast of fresh ass compared to Shao Kahn. It adds all this cool lore. It raises the stakes, the whole Kamidogu plot, Raiden's sacrifice, Liu Kang being dead. It gives the chance to a lot of other players to shine. Shujinko, which is a pretty underrated protagonist and a pretty underrated idea for a protagonist, not least of which because he is a protagonist that fails and has to not just save the world, but to reclaim his honor. And also the idea of going through the entirety of the game through his eyes and going through his entire life, with having the story take basically the whole of his life. It's a lifelong quest. It's not been done before. I'm not saying that Deception did it well, but definitely something that should be iterated upon. However, the game also added a bunch of dumb shit. If we're talking about lore, Chaos Realm and Order Realm shouldn't really exist, if we're being honest. They should never have been added. A whole host of new useless characters that don't have anything going for them. You all know them. Darius, Dairu, they even sound the same. Havoc's cool. Obviously, everyone likes Havoc, or at least OG Havoc. But, you know, if you pick the lore, you gotta take in the bad with the good. And I think I'm not willing to do that here. The mini-games. Now, the mini-games are peak. They are preem. So this is the one I really struggle with. Harakiris, they're nice, but I'm not gonna pick any particular finisher for this. I'm not gonna waste a choice for that. So really, the finalists here are mini-games and conquest mode. And as much as I love minigames, I'm practically obsessed with chess combat. Once I finally got to emulate Deception and play it, most of what I played is just chess combat. I love that minigame. I love all these minigames from the 3D era, but even though I love them, I think Conquest mode is more important. Not just because it's a cool concept in itself that deserves iterating upon, but also because I think it's a better story mode than story mode. The whole chapter structure, everyone's sick to death of it. It doesn't work that well for a fighting game. It's very arbitrary. It's very forced. When you have a setting like Mortal Kombat that has all these realms and places to explore, I'd much rather you get a quasi-open world, even if it's a small one. Give me a small open world or like sectioned off world and realms that I can explore and keep the story minimal. I don't care. You don't have to have this sprawling fucking overacted, way too much budget behind it story mode that no one gives a fuck about anymore. I would pick a conquest mode, a well-made conquest mode with the resources of today over story mode any day. And honestly, if it's got a good premise like the one that Deception has, with Shujinko fucking up and having to basically spend most of the story mode, or conquest mode rather, doing evil unknowingly, like gathering the Kamidogu for this fucking madman or Mad Dragon, that's some cool shit. I love it when games are willing to make you do evil shit like that, or to let evil shit happen like that. That's why people love Infinity Ward. So if I had to, as much as it pains me, if I had to pick one single thing from Mortal Kombat Deception, it would be Conquest mode. Alright, Armageddon. Music, I guess? I mean, I'd prefer the music of Deception, but I'm not gonna pick that over better things from that game. You could say the roster, but it's not really realistic to expect every single fighter in every single game. I mean, I don't really care about half of these if we're being honest. Air combat sucks, creative fatality sucks, the story sucks, Armageddon sucks, my son. It's time you grew into a man and understood that, no, not like that. A lot of you are gonna say create a character, but I'd much rather get a full body massage from Kintaro with happy ending than pick that. I wouldn't invest in something like that. I personally don't much care for that kind of feature. In fact, I actively dislike it for the same reason that I dislike the gear system in MK11, because everything ends up looking like multicolored vomit. Red scorpions, green Sub-Zeros, people with fucking tea kettles on their heads. Everything looks like shit because people are shit at creativity. This is just true. When you look at the lowest common denominator, the average, the vast majority of the population, most people have shit taste and low creativity, says the guy with an M&M for a head. No one asked you, so why would I open my game up to something like this and make everything look like a fashion designer's worst meth trip? And you could say, come on man, it's just a fun extra feature, it could be single player only. Fuck you, I'm not gonna invest resources into something I don't believe in. Eat a dick. A multicolored one. Plus, isn't that what mods are for? If free building Legos in single player is what you're after, overdose the game with mods and knock yourself out, preferably literally. If you watched my MK is anime video, which most of you haven't, then you know that the entire appeal of a fighting game is its characters, its pre-made characters. The Ryus, the Chun-Lis, the Scorpions, the Sub-Zeros, the Jin Kazamas, the Marvels, the DCs, my nuts. The look, the style, the backstory, the moves, the visual identity of these characters is what draws us in. I don't go to a restaurant to pay so I can cook my own food and be proud of the abortion I made. I don't cook. I eat.
Dick.
No, I pay you to cook my food for me so I can... People don't go to restaurants because they can't cook. Well, I can't. But they go to be served. They go to be served a beef Wellington, a classic American cheeseburger made the right way. I pay you, the developers, to create awesome characters and awesome outfits with awesome moves and then serve them to me. I don't want to cook my own food. Your mom cooks it for me. So custom characters, custom gear, custom on my I don't want any of that. Give me the standard, straight, white, plain, cisgendered and I am happy. Is it cisgendered? Sissy-gendered? MK vs. DC. I never understood why they decided that this is MK8. It has nothing to do with the main continuity. What's funny is if you take it out of the count, MK9 becomes 8, X becomes 9, 11 becomes X, and MK1 becomes MK0, which is fitting because there's like 0 MK DNA there. Yeah, I don't think I'll pick anything from this game. It introduced a lot of things that later became staples in MK9, like the meter system, the neutral jump punches, the general speed of the game and how characters moved, but I don't think any of that's worth... You know what? We'll go with the meter, okay? That's a good point, actually. I don't want to have to sacrifice any of the later games for the sake of meter, so not MK8, meter system. MK9. I think half of the entire fan base has this as their favorite MK game of all time. And that makes sense. This game, technically it doesn't add a lot that's new. 2v2s were there before. The meter and all that, like I said, were introduced in the previous game. The characters, the story, that's all a reimagining of MK was 1 through 3. It's more a celebration of MK, and that's why people like it so much. I guess it introduced X-rays and super moves, so that's something. Meter, super moves, X-ray, 2v2, art style. Art style wins. 2v2 is good, I love me some 2v2, but it turns out it's not important enough for me to pick out. Heck, I'm more tempted to choose King of the Hill instead of 2v2s. Even though King of the Hill appeared in other games, the MK9 implementation remains the best, by far. Having it look like an actual theater with seats where chibi versions of the characters gather around and eat popcorn and boo and cheer and grade the performances of the players at the end, that should be in every fucking game. That's what that should look like. It's adorable, but I'm still gonna pick the art style. What I'm really getting at here is something I've noted a bunch of times in the comments before with regards to the aesthetics of an ideal Mortal Kombat game, let's say, but I'm gonna save that for its own video. Suffice it to say that from MK9, I would take the art style. The general aesthetic, the action figure-y look of the characters, the sleek design, they're so glossy and shiny and punchable. A lot of the outfits are the best they've ever been, in my opinion. It's exactly what you would expect to see. It's just real enough while also being just cartoony or comic booky enough and stylized. It's a good balance between the two, and it really emulates that feeling of you just mashing a bunch of action figures together, which is what fighting games are for. It's a digital version of that. So we'll stick with the art style. MKX is my most played Mortal Kombat game. Fun fact, I have over 1,000 hours logged into MKX. Most of those spent online, most of those spent pummeling my desk into non-existence at 3 in the morning because some scrub beat me using a move that shouldn't have worked on me, but it did. And it's still my favorite game to play out of all of them. I would pick almost everything. I would pick a lot of things from MKX, obviously. Basically the combat as it is, maybe with a bit more responsiveness of the characters, because really the responsiveness in terms of how the characters move, accelerate, decelerate, the dashes, how they behave, it's a downgrade from MK9. It doesn't need to be the mad Looney Tunes-like fluidity of MK4, but it is a bit more clunky, and the controls are very clunky in MKX. Like, forward block to initiate a run? Are you high? I have to do 3 buttons just to start the run, and then I can't control the run? It runs automatically. I have to press another button, but not any button to stop it. What the fuck is wrong with the run button like we used to have back in MK3 and MK4? It's the most elegant solution. So I don't get the commands at all. They changed once again a lot of the way you do the special moves, which it makes sense because of the way dashing works in this game versus the last one. But anyway, the dark look of the game, the overall more desaturated. I wouldn't make it less saturated. I very much like the saturation of MK9 and Deception, but I do like the darkness. I like the contrast, the aggressive contrast between light and dark, just in terms of coloration and shadows. I love a lot of the designs, a lot of the outfits in this game are top-notch. The roster is probably objectively the best. It's the best blend of old and new. It's a pretty high number of characters in the roster. It is, for the first time in years and in many titles, a return to what I consider to be the heart and soul of Mortal Kombat, which is, like I mentioned, the running, the fast-paced combat, the adrenaline, pulse-pounding, just in-your-face gameplay, which didn't mean you didn't have zoning. In fact, MKX has, ironically, more archetypes than the current games do. People complain and whine all the time about it being too fast-paced and whatnot, and it's just a rush-down game. Everything is rushed down, everything is in your face. No, it's not, bitch. You got a lot of zoning, you got a lot of archetypes, you got a lot of setup characters, you got a lot of hybrids. There's so many ways to play the game. And when it got to MKXL and near the end of its life cycle, they really patched most of the broken shit out. It was a pretty balanced game, to the point where you could still have 50-50s in the game, but they weren't, they were reactable, most of them, which is what you want. You don't want it to be a pure strike throw game like MK11 was, and it still kept all the archetypes and it still kept all the options and different ways to play. It's just great. And that's really the main thing. Like, the overall darkness and the vibe of the game is exactly what MK should be. Even the character select screen, even something as simple as that, is just with the characters hanging in the background, and once you pick them, they confidently step forward like a gladiator being chosen. You know, like one of the hired assassins that you got roaming around with you, and then you pick different people for different jobs, and then you, that guy over there, you hunt him down. You go into this dangerous crater of a volcano thing and fight him to the death, and you bring me his head, and the guy just steps forward coolly, casually. He's like, I got this. And then it turns out he does not have that at all, as he just sinks into lava, Terminator style, and just makes a fool of himself and you. But the vibe is great, and that's really mostly it. The story's crap. There are no mini games. All the extra features, bits and bobs. I don't really give a fuck about the factions. What a joke. And I already picked the basic fighting style, the fighting philosophy, the combat, the philosophy of the gameplay from MK3, which is this but less elaborate, so I'm not going to pick that again. So that leaves us with really two key things that MKX introduced that were key features for the franchise: variations and brutalities. And I love brutalities. They're the new version of fatalities. They should be the main thing. But I like variations just a little bit more. Well, a lot more, let's be honest. Variations are very underrated. They had the right idea in X. They almost developed it to the point where they were pristine, perfect. Because the idea was, 1, to provide variety, just general variety. 2, to provide specialists an out in tournaments. People who don't want to learn like 15 different characters like Sonic Fox. They just want to stick to Sub-Zero or whatever. But if you meet a zoner and you can't get in, maybe you have a variation that helps you to do that, or you have a zoning variation that helps you to stay away from someone who wants to get in. And some characters had really, really good variations, like Takeda, like Tremor, like Alien, like Jason. These are characters that had 3 perfectly viable ways to play. All these variations were powerful, just in different contexts, and some of them in all contexts. It was just really a matter of what your preference is. And that's the way to do it. Unfortunately, some of the other variations were not good. You had a lot of characters like Quan Chi and Shinnok that had 2 variations that were really broken and 1 variation that no one ever used, and they never really got around to fixing that. So they needed another game. They needed to take another stab at it to fully realize the variation system. But they never did. So I'm gonna pick variations. Out of all the things that MK did right, this is the key one of the key ones. I love the running. The running is the main feature that I'm obsessed with, and I would definitely bring it back, but MK3 and MK4 both had that. I already picked it, and I would rather pick it there, because there it had an actual run button that you just hold down and you run like a normal person, not forward, block, run into fist into face. But I do like certain details that they added here, like if you get hit during a run, you lose your stamina. If you break or get broken, weird thing to say, that you also lose your stamina. Dashing consumes stamina because it has invulnerability. They did a lot of things right here. But anyway, variations. Moving on to MK11. I am fully tempted to not pick anything from this game just out of sheer spite and how much raw, seething hatred I have for it. Full disclosure, I befriended a genie a while back, and he agreed to grant me 1 wish just because we're tight like that. There are amputees all over the world who could be walking again right now, but they're not, because I'm still not convinced that erasing MK11 from history wouldn't be a better use of my time. Pun intended. Double pun intended, because erasing 11 MK11 from history would be rather fitting considering the game's plot. But no, there are some things worth picking, like the artsy fatality poses, the custom intros, victories, and the crushing blows. Mostly the effect. I don't care much about the specifics of the mechanics, or if it's even a full-blown gameplay feature. I just think the occasional slow-mo, bone-breaking, zoom-in shot, as long as it doesn't happen very often, is a nice break in the monotony and generates some excitement for the viewers. Like if you unexpectedly see that once during a clutch, a high-stakes tournament match like the finale or something, everyone in the crowd would suddenly cheer for that. It'd be great. I was gonna pick the slow-mo fatality freeze frame thing, but since my overall philosophy for fatalities is that they should be short, to the point, and often funny, I think I'll go with the crushing blow effect. MK12. You know, unlike most people, I actually like cameos. I see the value in them. I think they're a nice touch. They add a lot of depth and variety to the gameplay. It makes it more versatile. There's so much fun and complexity, and I'm only joking, it's a piece of shit. Although, true story, I actually did like the idea when they first announced it, and everyone else hated it, and now it's sort of the reverse, where some people, a lot of people, are kind of warming up to cameos, and I can't stand them. Okay, I don't hate them that much, but it's a gimmick, and it's not going to survive into the next game, so I don't get the point. And it also makes it harder to pick the game back up again. Like, I haven't played MK1 since launch, and the idea of having to go back in and not knowing all the new cameos and having to learn not just all the matchups, but all the cameo matchups and permutations, and the fact that cameos just do half of all the things in this game, and the characters have to be kind of dumbed down and simplified because of it. It's basically the same problem that Variations had, especially in MK11. It's just not that apparent. It's less apparent than it was in that game, because the characters are still, they seem whole, because the argument back then against Variations was that some characters didn't have signature moves and whatnot. Here they have their full kit, or most of their full kit, but it's either heavily nerfed, or there's not that many combo strings, or it's just like the general mobility, the general way you play the characters is heavily simplified so that they can have their fucking cameos. So cameos might use my wish to kill those instead of curing cancer. We'll see. I genuinely don't know. I'm not even trying to dunk on the game. I just genuinely don't know what to pick. What can I pick? What did MK1 offer besides cameos? What did they innovate with? What did they improve upon? What did they add? If you said Invasions, unsub right now. What can you pick? Seriously, it's the same. It's MK11 with a glossier paint job and less features. I don't know, the graphics? No, I'm not gonna pick graphics. That's counter to everything I stand for. You don't need good graphics to tell a good story. You don't need graphics for good gameplay. You don't need that good graphical fidelity for immersion, although I do acknowledge that it's important. You're watching a pixelated piece of PNG art talking through the screen with like 3 lines to it. Don't give me shit about graphical fidelity. You know what? I'll forego picking anything from this game so I can pick a second thing, like brutalities from MKX. Or maybe Reptile, specifically. The way they did him in that game is pretty good. It's pretty innovative. True story, there's a gameplay idea I had for Reptile that's pretty much what they did, just a bit more elaborate. It's more integrated into the gameplay, but that's a topic for another time. There, non-lethal finishers, fatalities, core gameplay, quirkiness, character models, conquest mode, music, meter, art style variations, and brutalities, the crushing blow visual effect, and that's enough of that. Share your own Frankenstein MK game below, join the Discord and post them there as well. And get roasted for it. Special thanks to Serhi Hrishin and Longthorn Henderson, as well as my other members, for supporting the channel.